Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way.
You are watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here as always alongside my intrepid, very intrepid colleague, Rania Khalek. Rania, great to be back alongside you.
It's good to be back alongside you, Eugene.
Well, as always, got a great show for you here today. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, just listen, this is just part of what we do, just effects of all types.
Well, Rania, look, I'm in Lebanon. It's okay. I think our audience at this point is used to my electricity just shutting off sometimes.
It's honestly, I don't watch the chat, but I do feel like it's one of these things that it'll prove who really watches on a regular basis, how people are responding to it. Who knows what's happening and who's freaking out. Either way, just speaks to your intrepidness moving forward. I'll remind those of you who are watching on YouTube, speaking of the chat, this would be a great opportunity for you to go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the bell so you get the subscribe button. And then you also want to make sure your notifications are on, so that way you can be notified about the things that you have subscribed to, so that you don't have to look very far for all the great content coming out from Breakthrough News. And I will note, especially dispatches by Rania Khalek, from Rania Khalek, a lot of great stuff coming out very frequently now about everything going on across West Asia. So you don't want to miss that. Rania, as we get the show off the ground here today, other things you want to remind our viewers about?
Yeah, I want to remind our audience that we are an independent media outlet here at Breakthrough News, and we are, that's why we depend on your support. So if you are able, please consider becoming a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News, where you can help sustain us for as little as $5 a month. And you can also access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. But most importantly, you will be helping an independent media outlet that is more crucial than ever. I'm coming to you live from Lebanon, which is under heavy Israeli bombardment and right now, and the Israelis are invading, and I'm going to be giving an update about all of that later on in the show. But literally, I'm able to bring you that kind of content because of your support. So if you appreciate the truth and hate the lies, go to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And you can also do some very basic things to help support us, like hitting the like button. Smash that like button, you guys. Helps boost us in the algorithm. There it is. And make sure you engage with our content as much as you can. Comment, share all the episodes that come up, and make sure that you are subscribed to notifications. Hit that bell and hit personalized so that you get a notification whenever we post new content, like my show dispatches or like this live stream that you're watching now.
Yes, no, absolutely. Critically important. Hate the lies and support the truth. What was that? That was good. That was a good tagline. I want to start using that.
I think it was something like if you hate the lies and want the truth. If you hate the lies and want the truth.
Well, see, it just shows that you're really good off the cuff right there. Well, let's go ahead and get the show off the ground. Myself and my talented colleague, Rania Khalek. The Senate here in the United States has begun to debate the quote-unquote Save America Act, which is a sweeping trunk-back voting reform bill that critics are warning could disenfranchise more than 21 million people here in the United States, disproportionately affecting Black, brown, young, and other marginalized voters. And we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show by Cliff Albright, who is the co-founder and executive director of Black Voters Matter, to discuss what's really going on with the SAVE Act and what is at stake. Cliff, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. And shout out to Rania. Our prayers are with you and your loved ones there in Lebanon.
Cliff, I want to start here with maybe demystifying the SAVE Act, because, of course, the way it's being presented by the Republicans is like, this is no big deal. You just have to show your driver's license or some form of ID. And why would you not want to show some form of ID? But it seems that is maybe gross oversimplification of what the SAVE Act actually is doing.
Yeah, gross misrepresentation, disinformation, as we said earlier, just outright lies. The SAVE Act, and I don't even call it the SAVE Act, I call it the Save Fascism Act, or maybe Save White Supremacy Act, but it's not saving America and certainly isn't saving democracy. But what it does is it's by no means just a voter ID law, right? Which to be clear would be bad in and of itself, right? Because there are issues with voter ID even of itself, but that's not even what this is. This is a show your papers, prove your citizenship, voter suppression bill, which goes much beyond just saying, oh, we want people to show ID. Every voter would have to be able to show documented proof of being a citizen, which for the most part would wind up being a passport, maybe a birth certificate. But the problem is, a few of the problems is that one, most Americans don't have a passport. Black Americans are twice as likely to not have a passport compared to white Americans. Two, there are a lot of people that don't have a birth certificate that actually matches their current photo ID. Case in point, if you're a woman or anybody else, but anybody who's gotten married and changed your last name, then those two documents are not going to match up, and that would become a problem, right? And so, we estimate that, potentially 3/4 of American voters would be impacted by this, and that's not accidental. Like, we know, and they know from other states like Kansas that have implemented statewide versions of this, they know that people wind up getting disenfranchised and wrongfully kept from being able to vote. In this case, that's exactly what the point is. It's nothing but voter suppression, and on top of that, it's an unconstitutional poll tax because it costs you money to even be able to get the documentation that they're saying that you have to be able to have. And so, just by definition, it's a poll tax, which makes it unconstitutional.
I want to ask you, because when we're talking about disenfranchising more than 20 million people, that's insane. But of course, this would, as has been mentioned, disproportionately impact Black, brown, young, and marginalized voters. Could you actually expand on that? Walk us through how that disenfranchisement actually happens in practice, and specifically who's most at risk of being pushed out of the electorate.
Yeah, and so it happens in a variety of ways and at a variety of phases. First and foremost, it's not coincidental that at the same time that you're trying to pass this, right, which again would require many people to have to get a passport, at the same time they're doing that, the Department of State has also issued guidance that says that public libraries, nonprofit libraries, that until recently have actually processed passport applications, they're saying they no longer are cleared to be able to do so. So at the very same time that they're requiring voters to have documentation like a passport, they're making it more difficult for people to get a passport. And this is part of the blueprint, right? Because in Alabama, about 10 years ago, when Alabama first passed its voter ID, just regular photo ID, at the same time that they passed that, they simultaneously went about closing the Department of Motor Vehicles across the state disproportionately in the Black Belt counties where most of the Black population lives. And so this is not this passport and library issue is not accidental. It's part of the blueprint, which connects directly to your question: who's most likely to be impacted? Again, and you name the communities. It's Black voters, it's Latino voters, it's low income voters, it's voters with disabilities, voters that might have a hard time traveling to go someplace, like if there's only one office within 100-mile radius where they can get their passport. Anybody that's got any of those limitations, and as I said before, anybody whose name has been changed because of marriage, all of that impacts who would be impacted. The other thing I just want to add on to that, and this is something that a lot of people aren't talking about, part of this bill also says that states have got to send their voter roll information through Homeland Security, and Homeland Security would then be able to purge people off of information that they have, right? But it allows them to do this quarterly, even as late as like 30 days before an election. So part of what this bill is doing is it's getting rid of what currently exists. Currently, you can't do massive voter roll changes in any state with less than 90 days before a federal election. This bill would undo that. So imagine people being told on September 30th that they just got purged because Homeland Security says that they're not a citizen. And now they've only got literally a handful of days to correct that, not just before the election, but before the voter registration deadlines, which in most states usually is about 30 days before an election. They are setting up a system which could literally, you don't just have to cancel election to cancel election. One way of canceling an election is simply by canceling everybody who's got the ability to vote in that election. And that's what's being set up with this.
You know, Cliff, I think that's such an important point. And thinking about just the impact of this and the fact, you know, people could get turned away and all the different challenges, is if there's some element of this that they're hoping it does create chaos at the polls in order to help facilitate this idea that there's problems with the elections. Because I know the Trump administration in particular has been, and their supporters, raising this issue of declaring emergencies and other things like that. So could this also play into a deeper strategy of not just purging voters, but also creating chaos at the polls to maybe change the nature of the election system in different ways?
Yeah, you know, chaos is always a part of the strategy, right? That goes back to even why they recently went and raided Fulton County in order to take the ballots, right? Is to, even though that election, the Georgia election, is one of these most recounted audited elections that there's ever been, right? Three basic recounts and audits all coming to the same conclusion that the loser lost, right? The orange man lost. But at the end of the day, creating that doubt, right? Creating that uncertainty, creating that chaos that you said. And it's all connected because we got to keep in mind at the same time that we're talking about the SAVE Act, what else are we talking about? We're talking about the possibility of ICE agents being at polling places, right? We're talking about Trump's efforts to get a hold of ballots in other states. It was Georgia, and then they're moving on to Arizona. And so you've got all of these things going on that are very much interconnected. And yes, it's to create fear, it's to create intimidation, but it's also just to create chaos, which, as we know, he's been hoping to be able to declare some type of insurrection act or some type of national emergency in order to, what he said, he wants to nationalize the elections, or more specifically, he really wants to nationalize the counting of ballots, right? And so any fear, any intimidation, any chaos that leads into that could very much result in him trying to use that as a guise for, you know, just assuming more power and taking over the entire election process.
So on that note, I want to ask, what are the Democrats doing? What's the plan here? Where's the opposition to this? I mean, I hope there's some opposition to this. I'm being a bit, rhetorical in that question, but I do really wonder, I hope there's staunch opposition taking place to make sure this doesn't happen. So yeah, fill us in.
Yeah, I mean, you've got different levels of opposition, and you know, in my mind, and I think in a lot of Black voters' minds, like the level of opposition has not been fierce enough, has not been strong enough. Obviously, they're having a debate about the SAVE Act right now in the Senate, and you've got just about all Democrats that are speaking out against it, except for who God only knows what Fetterman's what he's going to be doing, right? And then you've got Chuck Schumer sending strongly worded letters, but there's different people within the Senate that, you know, have been speaking out against this, and some for years, right? Some that have been very vocal, even going back to 2021 when we were fighting to get legislation like the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act or the Freedom to Vote Act. I got arrested 5 times at various protests pushing to get that legislation. And so there are different Democrats in the Senate and in Congress who fight more fiercely than others, but you know, they're using the legislative process. But you know, we'd like to see more, you know, out of them. You know, we'd like to see more subpoenas, right? We'd like to see even more introduction, like I just mentioned, the legislation. Like we'd even like to see them not just fighting against the bad stuff, but still go on and reintroduce the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, right? No, the numbers may not be there, although the numbers literally change every day. And I guess we just found out that another member of the Congressional Republican Caucus is possibly going to transition and pass away within the next month or two. But the numbers are changed. But more importantly, if Republicans could try 60 times to overturn Obamacare, even though they knew they didn't have the votes, right? But that they continued to push, they continued to make an issue out of it, right? To make a talking point out of it, then we can continue to push for voting rights and not just be in a reactive position, a defensive position of just having to fight back against the voters' pressure. We want them to fight back against the bad, but we also want to be more aggressive at going on offense.
I think that's an important point as well, Cliff. And I wanted to just ask you here too, for people who are concerned here, one of the things I've been paying attention to elections closely since 2000 that people always say is the easiest way to overcome voter suppression is to have more people vote and to not let yourself be turned away. And that even if somehow you are turned away, that can be documented and there can be legal action that can help change the law. So how important is it for people to not be cowed by this, whatever happens in the House, whatever happens in the Senate, but to show up and to stay in line to make sure that however many votes can get in, but that also if there is action at the polls it's unconstitutional, as you've mentioned, that there is documentation that can challenge these sorts of discriminatory practices?
Yeah, I mean, you've just summarized perfectly like what our challenge at Black Voters Matter is, and within our entire ecosystem is. It's to inform people, right, about the wrong, about the bad that is taking place, to have people be like reasonably concerned about it, right, but to not have people be paralyzed by it. To always remind people that at the end of the day, we have power. In fact, the reason that they're doing this is because we have power, because they know what our power is, and that's why they want to take away our vote and take away our voice. And so, being able to walk that fine line of reminding people that there is voter suppression, right? Voter fraud, fake, right? Undocumented folks voting in elections, that's all fake. But voter suppression, very real, right? And so being able to remind people of that, but also convincing people that we have the power, and then to give people the concrete things that we need to do in order to vote ourselves, to remind our loved ones to go vote, to participate in election protection, to maybe even be a poll worker yourself. Just the various ways that people can get engaged in the process. Because what I know is that when people are active, when people are engaged in organizing around things, then the fear doesn't, you don't get to sit in the fear, right? That once you stop doom scrolling and you realize that there's a role for every one of us to play in blocking them from doing this, then that's when, all of a sudden things become a little bit more manageable, right? Physically, mentally, financially, and all else. And so that's the message that we go around, telling our community that there are things that we can all do. When we fight back together, we win.
Mm-hmm. Well, Cliff, as always, we really appreciate you. The work of Black Voters Matter, very educational and great advocacy. So we appreciate you, as always, joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks for having me, y'all.
Mm-hmm. Rania?
Yes. No, I mean, it's hard for me to comment on insane stuff happening in the US. I just like watching things under the circumstances I'm in right now just seems like even more surreal because it's just a ridiculous country. Like you're trying to disenfranchise voters in the year 2026. Like you're going to go back 100 years. Okay. I mean, I guess it makes sense considering what you're doing all over the world right now. Just this like barbaric place run by a bunch of uncivilized racist psychopaths.
Yeah,
of course they don't want Black people to vote. Like,
well, and I think the two are connected if you look at it, because you see huge opposition in the Black population to the Iran war, and here they're asking for $200 billion more in front of Congress. They already think it won't pass, but it'll even be harder to do these sorts of ridiculous things that they need to fund wild, criminal adventures abroad if these warmongers lose out a little bit in the midterm. So you can see what it is. And Trump himself, by the way, is saying the only way we can win is if we do voter suppression. So it really kind of says everything you need to know. But wow. Well, we're going to keep this thing moving here, and we want to turn to excuse me, our next story here, which is Sudan's devastating civil war, which is now entering its fourth year. Fighting between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces is intensifying, and the humanitarian crisis only continues to deepen. And we are joined here by journalist Isma'il Kushkush to discuss where things stand in the conflict and how the war happening in West Asia is further affecting what is happening in Sudan. Isma'il, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, great to have you here. And, I think one of the things that there was a lot of chatter about, on the internet is whether or not, the impact of the war in West Asia on UAE would slow down the war in Sudan or perhaps start to bring it to a close. But it does continue to be, raging in a number of different fronts across the country. And of course, the U.S. now adding different sanctions on part of the coalition around the Sudanese armed forces. So, give us a sense of where the conflict is right now and maybe just a little bit on some of those points about how you think the regional situation is affecting it.
So at the moment, I'd say that the conflict in Sudan is at something of a stalemate. The Sudanese armed forces, the Sudanese army, which is the de facto government, controls most of the north, center, and eastern part of the country. The rapid support forces, which created this parallel government in the western part of the country and was able to ally itself with different forces, including the Sudanese People's Liberation Movement North, which is based in the southern part of the country in the Nuba Mountains, SPLM and North, and with some civilian political leaders created while the army.
Oh no, that's unfortunate. Hopefully we can get him back.
Just a little bit.
I know
internet
hiccup.
Yeah, I think he was in a place that had some storms past couple days. So we're going to work on that, and I will. We're bringing it back. Isma'il, please continue.
Thank you. So yeah, the government has been trying to relocate from back to Khartoum, and there are Sudanese that have been returning, but I would say it really is something of a stalemate at the moment. Efforts to get negotiations, talks between both sides really haven't worked out at the moment.
So I want to ask you, given that there's this overarching war the U.S. and the Israelis launched on Iran that has obviously had a huge impact on the Arab Gulf states, first and foremost, the UAE. And I raise that because we know the UAE is one of the primary backers of the RSF. And I'm curious how the war on Iran and the cascading impacts of that, specifically onto the Gulf states, given their role in the Sudanese war, I'm wondering if any of that has had an impact on the war in Sudan.
Right. The war has definitely had an impact economically, socially, politically. Let me just start economically. The impact on Sudan, like everywhere else in the world, with oil prices. With the situation of war in Sudan, the availability of oil, gasoline was already a problem, and now the prices have skyrocketed. And with that, the prices of food in areas that have some access to that. The socially there are large communities of Sudanese in the Arab Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, and Sudanese families depending heavily on the remittances of those families that are based in the Gulf. The future of those remittances, I think, is really under threat because life in the Gulf and the kind of work that is going to be an issue. I think with the impact of the war politically, I think you have to look at it from all sides. The impact on the UAE, but also the Iran's connection with the Sudanese army and the Sudanese government. On the one hand, the Sudanese army, which is again the de facto government, has been dependent on Iran as one source for weapons, along with other governments. I think that is going to have an impact. The official position of the Sudanese army government has been something of, a neutral. It does have good connections with Saudi Arabia, with Egypt. Has been critical of Iran's attack on the Persian Gulf countries, but at the same time, it hasn't really fully condemned the Iranian government. Now, the impact on the UAE could have some impact on its support for the RSF. I think that will also we'll see that how that plays out. The other thing that I think that is a new factor that may be playing in how things play out in Sudan is the designation of the Sudanese Muslim Brotherhood as a sponsor of terrorism by the Trump administration. This is about 2 days ago. The impact of that being that the Bashir government that came down with the Sudanese revolution in 2019, still members of that government are believed to still have wide connections and an impact on the Sudanese army. If this designation and it likely will have some impact on the financial ability of those members and their connection to the army, I think that is definitely going to have some say in how this war plays out. Another issue I think also is if this war goes to the Red Sea. Sudan has a coast of 700 miles on the Red Sea. Iran has allies in the Houthis in Yemen. Does that play out in the Red Sea? I think that's also another factor to look out for.
One other issue that I'm curious your thoughts on, Isma'il, is one that's been discussed in the past few days is what the potential impact could be of the integration between the joint forces from Darfur and the Sudanese armed forces, and whether or not that might create, more friction, perhaps, between different elements of the coalition backing the de facto government, and of course has deep implications vis-a-vis sort of the demographics of the country and any settlement, as well of the conflict in the future.
Well, the government in Port Sudan, essentially is something of an alliance at the moment that includes those joint forces. Joint forces are an alliance of Darfur rebel groups. As matters unfold and as the government, that de facto government, tries to articulate some sort of normalcy and return of governance, the rivalry between different factions on who gets what in government, I think, will start to play out. And that's where I think you might see some divisions. Do the joint forces get what positions in government? Also, there's been a lot of rhetoric on how far will the Sudanese armed forces go in this war. Will it, go all the way to fight in Darfur? Of course, for the joint forces, that is a key issue. These are forces that have their base in Darfur. The Darfur rebel groups. There've been, again, the official position of the army is that it will, keep on fighting to against the rapid support forces to reclaim the entire country. There have been questions raised here and there. Is that the position of everyone in the army? So I think that keeping that coalition, I think, is going to be interesting. And then also, again, with the, as I mentioned, the designation of the Sudanese Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist or organization, right or wrong, that's a different matter. But how does that play out politically with the army? And what kind, who is kept, who is dismissed? I think all of that is going to start to play out in the coming weeks and months.
I'm actually curious, as I was kind of reading up on developments in Sudan more recently, there was a report today that there was this drone attack from Sudan that killed 17 people in Chad. So that meaning like that war is spilling over into the border, and the RSF denied it was them. The Sudanese army denied it was them. I'm just curious if you have any comments or thoughts on that particular development.
I think it was very much expected that aspects of this war are going to go into neighboring countries, whether they be Chad or Ethiopia. We know that the RSF has strong links with the Chadian government, as it does with Ethiopia, and the rebel movements that are connected to in both countries, like the Tigray Liberation Movement. The TPF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front in Ethiopia, and its connections with the Sudanese army. And on the Chadian side, the Rapid Support Forces and its connection with the Chadian government. I think it was expected that these things are going to spill into neighboring countries. And make matters even much more messier.
Just before you touched on it, but before we close here, I did want to also just speak a little bit more about the nature of the humanitarian crisis in Sudan, which is very intense. Some say the worst in the world, but if you could just say a little bit more about the situation as the war develops for the people on the ground who are caught in it.
Right. So, this is 3 years of conflict. The largest displacement population in the world. Over 12 million people have been displaced. The famine-like conditions have been declared in parts of the country. The estimate of those that have been killed, died because of the conflict are as high as 400,000 now. So it is a conflict that hasn't received the attention that it deserves. It is undoubtedly the worst humanitarian crisis on the planet at the moment. This idea of trying to bring back life to a normal, back to normal. When you think that agriculture in the country has been disrupted for 3 years. Widespread diseases, and with the cuts in funding to international aid by the U.S. and by other governments, and attention that is being paid to other conflicts in the world. This is Sudanese feel that they're on their own and dealing with a huge crisis, it's been called the forgotten war, and that's for a reason, that it just hasn't received the type of attention that it deserves.
Well, we are really grateful to you for bringing some attention to this and helping us sort through it all, and we will do our best to continue to cover it. Journalist Isma'il Kushkush, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunate that it isn't getting the coverage that it's deserved pretty much from the beginning, except for, the odd thing here and there that, will make it to the Western press. But big part of the broader regional issues here and the sort of interconnectedness of the kind of Nile Basin in West Asia is very close. So this is, all of a piece.
Well, I want to take this as an opportunity, Eugene, because to plug Breakthrough News, because I think it's, we're one of the few outlets that have consistently been covering Sudan from the beginning. Not only that, but, sometimes a lot of outlets will just cover what's getting the most clicks. And obviously, like, Sudan doesn't get the most clicks because it's so ignored and it seems so complex. And, oh, it's Africa. Like, who cares? Everyone's just always killing each other in Africa. And so we regularly have very in-depth updates from very knowledgeable people about what's going on in Sudan. And for that reason, I'm really going to just not just pat us on the back, but say that's why you should support Breakthrough News, because we are one of the few outlets, even in the progressive American media, who's bringing you regular Sudan coverage. And also, I want to remind people, not only can you support us by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news and becoming a member, I want to remind people who are watching to please make sure you like the show. Hit the like button, you guys. If you haven't already, please smash that like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm.
It does indeed. Well, we are going to move forward here on the show. And last night, the U.S. Israeli war escalated further as Israel struck the South Pars gas field in Iran, which is shared with Qatar and one of the largest natural gas deposits in the world, I think the largest. And Iran responded by targeting energy facilities across the Gulf. And so the conflict spreading across the region here, critical infrastructure continuing to be hit, and shockwaves are flowing through global energy and other markets. So we are happy to be joined to help us sort through it all by Ashok Kumar, who's an associate professor of political economy at Birkbeck University of London, to discuss the widening war and its mounting impact on the global economy. Ashok, as always, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, a lot going on here. UAE announcing at morning our time here in the United States that it'll take 3 to 5 years Qatar, to restore the gas facilities that were hit. We're hearing about fertilizer. We're hearing about lifting of sanctions. I mean, it really does feel, as the war starts to stretch on, that the possibility of serious disruption to the global economy may be already with us, but certainly continuing to loom quite large.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it depends on how much further it goes. I mean, certainly Iran has established a level of deterrence when it comes to their sort of fossil fuel infrastructure, gas, oil, etc. They're responding to the bombing that was done by Israel. And so I think it depends. They said this is just the beginning. Trump obviously tweets out that, this needs to stop. And as we know, Israel could just act and antagonize it more. Now, if that happens, it's not just that it'll take necessarily 3 to 4 years to rebuild this. It took 14 years to construct this. This is some of the most advanced infrastructure in gas in the world, in LNG in the world. And it represents 17% of LNG production and 3.5% of LNG globally. So we're going to see a reduction. This is liquid natural gas. And so the knock-on effects of that isn't just the effect it has on consumption globally. You're seeing that happen already right now. You're seeing shortages and across South Asia, Africa. The global South will be hit first. You're also seeing in South Korea. Newspapers just today reported in Britain that the BP chief told Starmer that Britain will start rationing soon. And so this is reverberating across the globe, just based on the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. If they destroy the infrastructure, that infrastructure will take 10 years to build up to the capacity they have today. And it's not just that infrastructure will take 10 years. It'll only be built really by state infrastructure. You won't have any private investment or any kind of public-private partnerships happening, because the risk of destruction will always be looming. So the liabilities will be really high. And so it's about, and we're talking, if you take the Gulf and you take Iran and Iraq, all of that included, that's 50% of the oil production in the world. So the long-term impact of this would be potential economic catastrophe and immiseration and suffering for a lot of the world, but also potentially the acceleration towards a kind of decarbonization, because countries that aren't oil rich right now can see the liabilities that are attached to fossil fuels. So I'm not trying to say silver line it. Of course, in many ways, this is disastrous. But in lots of ways, there are other alternatives that will potentially arise out of it.
I want to ask you about the U.S. here, right? Because U.S. officials in the Trump administration keep putting forth these arguments that, like, we're going to be shielded from this. The U.S. produces its own energy. We don't really import that much. It's going to be fine. There was even, this attitude of like short-term pain at the gas pump for long-term gain. And like also these ruling elites don't care if like people who are living paycheck to paycheck have to spend more on gas to fill up their tanks. But all that's to say, you know, can the what are going to be, what would be, if this continues, the impact on the US itself? Because at the end of the day, you know, Iran is using its leverage to its economic leverage as a weapon in this war after it was attacked. And so its enemy here is the US. How does this impact the US?
Well, look, lots of these Gulf states, as people and viewers will know, are effectively operating as sort of not vassal states, but they operate at the behest of the US. The US has bases there. Those bases then, you know, it's almost like a protection racket. The destruction of those bases and the destruction of that oil infrastructure means that there's a kind of twofold impact. The reason why the US, of course, not to do a kind of imperialism 101 here, but is the reason why the US is so powerful is primarily because of, you know, the fact that they have this global reserve currency, which is the dollar. You see a dramatic shift away from that. So the dollar, petrodollar, becomes central in US asserting its global hegemonic power. You're seeing an active and a passive move away from that. So you're seeing an active move away from that in the fact that Iran says we will trade it in non-US denominated currencies, the Chinese RMB. And so you're seeing that already beginning. And you're seeing the fact that if the oil doesn't circulate globally, and so the Americans have come out and said, you know, we'll protect our oil, and the Russians have come out and said that we'll protect our oil, and so what that does is slowly move us away from that kind of global world order. And it's also the fact that the American bases are being destroyed, and those likely won't be rebuilt or rebuilt to the same capacity, because the whole deal was you provide us protection and we'll allow you to have bases and lots of power here. So in both regards, you'll see a weakening of that power. That means the reduction of economic power. So there's that at the kind of hegemonic level. But at the practical level, we're not just talking about oil, we're talking about fertilizer, we're talking about a lot of different products that need to be circulated that will also affect the Americans, of course. We're also talking about global inflation. Once oil reaches, let's say 150, 200, let's say, by April, May, June, who knows, that affects inflation everywhere. So that inflationary cost will be baked into every country, and that will be baked into the American economy as well. So the American economy, of all the economies, is the most global of the economies. So the idea that they'll somehow be inoculated or insulated from the impacts of this is fantasy.
I think that's such an important point, and I think we can see it from, you know, the White House is, you know, Iran is totally destroyed every single day. There's phantom convoys that are being declared that are going to be moving people through the Straits of Hormuz. I mean, seemingly try to manipulate markets through these various things, but all of it seems to be a little bit of an illusion. I mean, I'm no military expert, but, you know, you hear Iran's missiles were totally destroyed, and then there's like 4 volleys of missiles towards Israel, like the 15 minutes after they say that. So, I mean, it does seem that whether they underestimated them or not, that, you know, it's a false dawn, this idea that somehow Iran is like, you know, imminently collapsing here.
Yeah, no, of course. Look, we know the kind of munitions that exist in the Gulf states. We know what the munitions that exist in many different contexts because they're directly done by the US and they're kind of public contracts, etc. There is no idea the missile capacity in Iran, right? What we know right now is that Iran hasn't sent a single cruise missile. And the CIA report alone says that they have over 1,000 cruise missiles. We know that. We know that they have, and this is the CIA report, between 40 and 80,000 Shahed drones. They have sent out less than 3,000. So the capacity here is in question. Where people misunderstood, and I think certainly the Americans did. I'm not so certain that the Israelis did as much. They try to, you know, rope the Americans into this potentially, but is that during the 12-day war, they gave forewarning and they sent in older models. None of the new ones that we're seeing be sent out right now. And so that might have misled or given, you know, the West a sense that they could just dominate. And so you see this come out even in the way that Trump speaks. He says, oh, we'll take control of the Strait of Hormuz. You can physically go there. You can't take control because it's not a military that you're taking control, because the missiles are the ones that cannot be necessarily controlled. It was the same kind of rhetoric that happened during Yemen when the Red Sea blockade happened. Biden and Trump said, oh, we'll go there and take it over. But the missiles kept coming. And because the missiles kept coming, no ships could cross. because the liabilities are too high. So private companies aren't going, even if they were insured by the Americans, even if they could get an escort by the American military, they wouldn't do it. So the idea that somehow they're going to use conventional weapons, they're going to use conventional fleets and somehow overwhelm them. Well, the preponderance of evidence shows that they're not able to do that. It's a new form of war, and the missiles and the drone swarms keep coming, and it doesn't seem like there's any end in sight. And you also had local production. It's not just mosaic structure that we're talking about with Iran, where different groups have different sections have different forms of autonomy. It's also that they were producing domestically using sort of domestic products locally in underground tunnels. So there's no way of knowing for the Americans and the Israelis to know where and how this will stop. And that's one of the reasons why they've kept going back and asking for negotiations just to restart. That doesn't come from a place of confidence. It comes from a place of fear.
Let's say the war ended today. I mean, I wish it would, right? But let's say it ended today. How much damage has already been done? Because we're looking at, I think we're hearing estimates of like at least 3 more weeks. And I mean, that could be longer, but at least 3 more weeks. Already in just 3 weeks, a lot of damage has been done. So walk us through like what the damage is so far, and then how much worse can it get if this goes on another months?
Okay, so there's 2 things. I think the first part is around the amount of infrastructure and American bases that have been destroyed. Those bases, I think, will potentially, some of them will be rebuilt, some of them won't be rebuilt, but they won't be built to the same capacity. The second part is the infrastructure that's been destroyed. That leads to massive disinvestment because the potentiality of another attack is always looming. Before this, it was just threats. Iran was making threats and people felt like, they weren't necessarily concrete. Now and into the foreseeable future, that risk has been baked into every decision that'll be made in the Middle East. Certainly, when we talk about Dubai, for example, it was seen as a safe space, a place where people can go and invest and get some nice sun. And it was just, that is gone. There's very little likelihood of that, despite the best efforts of the UAE to try and change the narrative. So that's the first point. The second one is around the US military. It will be very difficult for the foreseeable future for the Americans to lead a large-scale conventional war. This is especially at the weakened position they're in. I mean, this is precisely why Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, just today came out and said, well, Russian oil, we're unsanctioning it and we'll potentially unsanction. They might have just unsanctioned Iranian oil at sea. What does that tell us? Partly it tells us that they're terrified of the prospect of global shortages and not only the effect on the economy, the reaction to the Americans. I mean, Israelis, the negative reaction will be a long-term impact, but also they are trying, and I believe this, I don't know but I suspect that it's kind of a massive fig leaf to the Iranians to say, okay, this is on the table. We're serious about getting rid of sanctions against Iran. I imagine that's what it is. And so I think that the long-term impact of this is both at the hegemonic level, but also at the very practical level. And you have to understand that these oil tankers get to the US after 2 weeks. So they're not even seeing the impacts of this necessarily. The Americans, they make, sweet crude, they produce sweet crude, but they transport that. They take, crude from Canada and they refine that, and they take it from Venezuela and they refine that. So it's not like they're producing in the US and necessarily selling the American markets. So the impact on it, even if America is a producer, again, they're not going to be insulated from this. They're still going to see an impact. The question is, will it continue for 3 weeks? If it continues for 3 weeks, there's no telling what will happen.
And I want to ask you on that front. I mean, the guest we had on before you, Isma'il Kushkush, talking about Sudan, was also raising the issue of what's the long-term impact of remittances on the Sudanese population moving forward. And I think that's a big question, vis-a-vis the Gulf for, India and all of South Asia, for the Philippines, other parts of Southeast Asia. I mean, if this keeps going on, I mean, what are some of those knock-on effects with remittances and international labor flows they're so closely related to the Gulf?
Well, look, as the economy of these countries potentially, again, there's no way of telling exactly how the long-term impact will be. But if you just take, for example, the UAE, you're going to see levels of disinvestment, also flight of the wealthy there. You're already seeing it. And so that will have an impact, particularly on South Asia. You're seeing GCC countries have a huge proportion of South Asian labor. India is the largest, in particular, India is the largest sort of recipient of remittance. I mean, 3.5% of its GDP is tied to remittance. So the impact of not only the fuel crisis, not only the fertilizer crisis, but a crisis of remittance looms large, especially for South Asia, particularly for India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. So these are countries that aren't oil rich and also rely heavily on remittance. So again, the knock-on effects could be quite significant.
And I have to ask one more question. What about the Israeli economy? I mean, the Israelis, obviously, they've been at war for like more than 2 years, and they're heavily subsidized by the US, but their lives are being disrupted more than at any other time. Like, they actually are experiencing consequences here because the Iranians are firing ballistic missiles at them. They're firing way more than they did during the 12-day war. And on top of that, Israel does have good air defenses, but the interceptors are running low. And Hezbollah is also firing as well, sometimes in coordination with the Iranians. I know you're following all this, but just to give some background to our audience, Israelis are spending a lot of times in shelters. There's all these reservists constantly being called up. So that means people aren't going to work. So at what point does it impact their economy in a negative way?
Well, you've seen a kind of broader impact on their economy over the course of the last 2.5 years, because so much of the workforce is going into reserves, going into the war economy, that you've seen that they've signed this deal with India to get hundreds of thousands of Indians to replace this labor on short-term contracts. And there's indication now that they're being racially abused, and this has been circulated a lot in India. So you have that kind of labor replacement question. You also have a secondary problem of, because such a huge proportion of Israel, because it's a settler colony, such a huge proportion of Israeli society are dual citizens. There was a Guardian article just a few months ago talking about how this kind of creamy layer of Israeli society, the professionals, the ones that can just pack up and go and are economically resourced to go, are leaving. So you have this kind of brain drain already taking place in Israel. And so the impact on the Israeli economy is definitely, I think, and also you're seeing not necessarily BDS, but you're seeing companies not wanting to become Starbucks or McDonald's. And so they're not saying it explicitly, but they baked into their risk assessment is, what is the risk of us being ostracized globally as a consequence of doing investment in Israel? So you're seeing all this happen before the recent war. The recent war definitely, I imagine, will have quite a significant impact on investment in Israel, on the proportion of people that will move to Israel. But then you look at recent polls, I think it came out a couple of days ago, that something like 80% of Israeli society still want to continue the war on Iran, even though they're in their shelters. And so that sort of tells you that you have this, what's remaining in Israel is this hardened core of quite war-hungry people. So the population that remains there may not necessarily leave, but this creamy layer leaves, and investment, probably we'll see a downturn. Hopefully, you'll see a downturn.
I think there are many people all around the world in the 9 figures hoping for that. No doubt, maybe even more than that. Well, as always, we really appreciate you joining us here on the show. You're always fantastic on social media, sorting through all of this. So Ashok Kumar, thanks so much for being with us again on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I just didn't know if you wanted to jump in. You have a smile on your face there, so.
Well, when I think of the Israelis, I just think of an army of rapists. It's like, well, it's an army of rapists. Like, it's like they just want to keep raping and turning everything around them into an apocalyptic moonscape. It's so dangerous. Dangerous society.
Well, indeed, they have done quite a bit of destruction, and we have been doing our best to cover that, and we will continue to do it. And on that front, as it concerns the current U.S.-Israeli war, I know earlier today, Rania, you were able to interview Hassan Ahmadian, who is an associate professor of West Asian Studies at the University of Tehran. So we want to go to that now.
Joining me now is Hassan Ahmadian, associate professor of West Asian Studies at the University of Tehran. Hassan, it's good to have you back on the show.
By all means, thank you for having me.
So last time I spoke to you, it was a couple weeks ago. It was closer to the beginning of this war. You were in Tehran. Now you're talking to me from Doha right now. But there's so much I want to ask you about, including what's happening inside Iran. But I guess, I want to go with what's in the news right now first, and that's with the latest escalation. Just yesterday, the Israelis struck Iran's southern gas fields, reportedly, or they claimed in coordination with the U.S., though of course Trump then publicly denied involvement, likely to avoid triggering broader retaliation from Iran. But of course, there were hits as a result on energy infrastructure in Arab Gulf states. And so I just wanted to get your take, how significant is this shift toward targeting of energy infrastructure? And of course, it wouldn't be the first time that the Americans or Israelis have done that in Iran. Are we entering a new phase of the war where where energy infrastructure becomes a part of the battlefield?
Well, I think that was basically coming from the beginning of the war. The war started with the premise that a hit on the political system's leadership will bring it down. But then that didn't happen. And then they moved to, well, we are with the Iranian people, that narrative, and we are helping them against their regime, as they like to put it. And that didn't work. The maximum effort they did was 2 days ago in the fireworks day in Iran, which happens on Wednesdays on the end of Iranian year. Every year, they try to cover a uprising and maybe military, move against the system within the country through that timing or within that timing. That was the peak of it. Many announcements by Iranian opposition, armed oppositions, what came out. Israelis kept talking about the time for the Iranians to rise up and free themselves alongside the Israelis that are freeing them with the bombs they're dropping on them. And with the Americans also, there were some talking points on this. That didn't materialize in any shape or form. Actually, I called friends and family back home because I was in Doha, and they said the fireworks were actually way lower than we are used to in the previous years. So people know what's going on. And so the second phase, that is trying to, forge an uprising within the country, didn't materialize in any meaningful way. And ergo, the third phase, that is Iranian infrastructure, that is collective punishment. Why didn't you rise up against your regime that we don't like? So you have to pay the price for that. And that, I think, is a stupid strategy, because that prolongs the war for the aggressors who are trying hard to find a way out. And secondly, it pushes Iranians who are still critical of some of the policies within closer to the political system, rally around the flag, galvanized as a result of attacking the property of the Iranian people. That's why I think they got into this. But the Iranian retaliation forced the U.S. president to write on his Truth Social that we didn't know about it. That was a mistake. And the Iranians, he was basically making also announcement on the part of Iranians. Iranians didn't know that we weren't involved. And so we won't allow Israel to do this, which tells us, as someone who's following the news, tells me that, well, the United States knew. And so the authorization was within the United States. There is no really any meaningful way that Israel can pull this off without informing and having the blessing of the U.S. CENTCOM and its leadership. And so he's saying, no, we didn't know. And let's hope that this will put a cap on targeting of infrastructure, because Iran was clear in that it will go after the infrastructure in Israel and in countries that these attacks are being launched from against Iran.
Right. I want to also ask you to what you were saying in this third phase of collective punishment. part of this third phase is also escalating the assassinations of Iran's state leaders, which is quite unprecedented. I mean, the Israelis and Americans have assassinated leaders of non-state actors before. Obviously, you had the Israelis assassinate every leadership position of Hamas over the last 2 years. We saw in 2024 and an ongoing attempt to assassinate anyone who's in a leadership position of Hezbollah. But those are not countries, right? Those are non-state actors. Iran is a country. Since then, a new, leadership has been chosen. And we've seen Israel continue assassinating senior figures and also threatening to assassinate the new leader. But in recent days, we've seen them assassinate Ali Larijani, for example, who was the head of the National Security Council, and in addition to also targeting Iranian civilian infrastructure, in addition to other kinds of infrastructure. So I wanted to ask you, there's been so many losses in Iran. And the idea for the U.S. and the Israelis especially is to collapse the state. Are they any closer to achieving regime collapse? I mean, obviously, there would essentially at some point be a limit to how many leaders you can kill. But would you say there's been a fundamental ongoing misreading of the resilience of the Iranian system here?
I mean, talking about the legality of it is absurd at this point because Israel has nothing to do with any legal action or legal procedure. Internationally or regionally, they waged a genocide in Gaza. They killed tens of thousands in Lebanon, in Palestine, and in Yemen, and now in Iran and elsewhere around the region. So, it's all illegal as per the international law to attack the political leadership of a sovereign nation. But I mean, that's absurd to talk about Israel and put it in a legal frame. But that's aside, I think what their calculus was that hitting Iranian leaders and assassinating them would lead to a sense of insecurity, and then their sleeper cells and the people who they thought would rally around them rather than their own country would come together against the system, feeling that the system is weakened, and then they will collapse it altogether, and then the state might get into a civil war, which is ideal for Israel. But I think that's very much, far from the reality on the ground in Iran. First off, there is no dearth of leaders coming up in Iran. I mean, there are numbers of people who are fit to lead the country in key positions are a big number. How many you can kill, and what are the retaliations? Can you, in a cost and benefit analysis, can you shoulder the burden of assassinating an Iranian leader and then being bombed like they did 2 nights ago, the heaviest during the entire war? I think that's the calculus is wrong. They think that Iran's political system is a person-based system. It's not. It has actually parallel institutions. It's one of the most institutionalized political systems in the world. I teach political systems, and I've researched it extensively. For any institution in Iran, there's a parallel institution as well. There's an army, there's an IRGC, there's a parliament, there's a guardian council, there's a judiciary, there's a revolutionary judiciary. Every system has a parallel. That, in addition to the fact that there are numerous people who can fill in the shoes of those who are assassinated by the enemy. I think that's really a wishful thinking more than a real strategy on the ground, that with assassination of a single person, the system could collapse. I mean, the war started with the assassination of the highest Iranian official. 2 hours later, the Iranians started firing like never before on Israel and on U.S. bases. That in and of itself is a lesson that speaks to the level of institutionalization of this political system. So that's, I think, a wishful thinking. It will never get to where the Israelis and the Americans want. And it has been proven so the past 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's really unbelievable that they continue to talk about trying to stir up internal unrest and having the complete opposite response from inside of the country. I wanted to ask you about the Strait of Hormuz because that I think is getting the most attention because that's Iran's biggest leverage point now. And of course, the U.S. we hear is talking about forcing it open, even floating scenarios like securing Karg Island. That we're seeing them talk about that as well. Talking about sending invading forces. There are already Marines on their way that are supposed to arrive, I think, next week. How realistic is that militarily, this idea of the U.S. sending ground troops to secure the Strait of Hormuz to like invade this island that has, you know, Iran's biggest oil refinery? Would the U.S. actually be able to reopen the strait without A, triggering a wider and more uncontrollable war, and B, like, it just seems like that's like a losing strategy. I just wanted to get your thoughts.
I think theoretically can think of a scenario where the U.S. Boots on the ground can do some damage to Iran's infrastructure around the Strait of Hormuz, hoping that they can open it. But that can only insecure it further. Secondly, I think if you look at numbers, 25,000 American troops have already left the region from the start of the war, according to many sources. Now them sending 2,000, 2,500 to, occupy Iranian land and have a control over the Strait of Hormuz. That's, I think, is something more related to rhetorical escalation than reality on the ground. Another aspect that I would look at this Strait of Hormuz, standoff is the dominance that Iran imposed on this conflict, the escalation dominance. From the get-go, the Iranians went in a way in retaliation against the aggression that basically forced the other sides to react rather than initiate their own strategy. And they have been reacting ever since the beginning of the war with the assassination. They didn't expect, the president of the state said, we didn't expect this to happen. He places it in a rather vague terms, but he said it that we didn't expect Iran to go this far in targeting U.S. assets in the region. I think that speaks to the reality of Iran's escalation dominance. That escalation dominance brought the United States from the top of the tree to its bottom. They started with the aim of collapsing the system and the state. Then they talked about, that didn't happen. They talked about choosing a new leader. That didn't materialize. Iranians, a sovereign and a proud nation, wouldn't allow anyone to interfere in their own politics within. And then when that didn't materialize as well, they said, we will end Iran's military capabilities, namely Iran's ballistic missiles program and its drones program. That didn't materialize. Just hours ago, there was another Iranian operation against Israel and U.S. assets in the region. So that didn't happen. Now they have came to the minimal goal that just was a result of this war. Remember, the Strait of Hormuz was wide open before this war. The Iranians brought them from bringing down the system to a war game that was not a focused goal in the get-go. It was open, but now they're talking about it as a war goal for their war efforts, which tells me that it's a mission creep. They didn't achieve what they were after. Now they want to establish what they had before the war, and talks about Iran's Karg Island, occupying that. First off, it's one of the most fortified Iranian lands because of its strategic importance. Secondly, it's deep inside the Persian Gulf. They cannot bring any of their aircraft carriers close to the Strait of Hormuz, let alone inside the Persian Gulf. The closest one is 1,000 kilometers away from Iranian shores. And so how can you move to that direction, bring in 2,500 troops to occupy the Iranian territory without logistics to back them up? Basically would be sending them to be killed by the Iranians and their missiles and their drones and their forces on the ground. So I think that, to me, is not a serious proposition. I think it's basically rhetoric aimed at piling pressure on Iranians. But I mean, there is nothing in that to pressurize Iran more than it has already been under. I mean, the pressure is on its maximum, but still the Iranians are fighting back and having the escalation dominance.
The incompetence is truly staggering here, and just like continues to move forward at an insane pace. Just a couple more things I wanted to ask you about. One, I wanted to ask you about the Arab Gulf states. Obviously, Iran's been striking these Gulf states that host U.S. bases, putting enormous pressure on countries that have tried to, stay out of a direct confrontation, right? They're like letting, the U.S. do the direct confrontation. How do you think this is going to reshape Iran's relationship with the Arab Gulf countries going forward? There was a lot of work done in the last few years to try to make those relationships better, especially on Iran's part and other actors as well, through regional diplomacy. Do you think it's going to be repairable after this?
I think there will be much of new lines of diplomacy between Iran and GCC countries due to this war. Their lands, the bases on their lands have been used against Iran before the war for decades. They would say this is a sovereign matter. We have good connections with the states. We would give them our bases. It's none of your business. But the Iranians would be, okay, that's your call. That's your security. But now it's another story. These bases, these assets, as per Kane in his briefing in the Pentagon, as per President Trump, who said NATO is not helping us, but our allies in the region are helping us. Who are the allies? Israel is already in the war. Who are U.S. allies who are helping it? It's the CENTCOM enterprise, as General Kane has put it. The headquarters in Tampa, Florida, but the infrastructure is in the GCC. It is being used as a pivotal point to launch the aggression from the south against Iran, the American operation. The Israeli operation is mainly a bombing operation through fighter jets, but the American one is a sea and land and air campaign against Iran from the south, and the CENTCOM is central in that. And so the Iranians have a case now. You can't have bases here. You can't have bases that you're telling us it's not being used, but we have the evidence, and they will be offered the evidence of them being used. I mean, 3 fighter jets were downed in Kuwait, 3 refueling planes, American refueling planes were hit on ground in Saudi Arabia. Lots of developments have happened that says otherwise. I mean, the GCC is saying we're not part of it, but their land, their airspace, their sea is being used. And so the discussion after this war, would it be about, economic ties, diplomatic ties, smiles? I don't think that will be the case. The Iranians will be like, no more U.S. bases on your ground. These are enemy bases, and we will target them. According to what the Iranians are saying, 14 U.S. bases are out of work at this point due to Iranian attacks. They have been basically out, and I don't see any scenario that Iran would allow U.S. to rebuild its capacity, military and security capacity in these countries, be it through war or through diplomacy. They would prefer diplomacy with the GCC to have a way out of this, but I think the goal is very clear. No more U.S. presence, in this region.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how things play out. But before I let you go, I do have to ask you, Hassan, because I am speaking to you from Lebanon. Just looking at the bigger regional picture here, a lot of people in Lebanon are wondering if Iran comes out of this in a position of strength. Do you see Lebanon becoming part of a broader regional settlement?
Well, I think I said it from when Lebanon, Hezbollah got into the war. Right after that, I talked about this. I said there is no scenario in which Iran would accept a unilateral ceasefire. The war is a regional one now, and the ceasefire should be a regional one. That's what the Iranians are now terming as comprehensive ceasefire. That is a regional ceasefire that, if violated in one front, would be violated entirely. That way, a ceasefire would be more stronger against violations, because the ceasefires we had in the past year or so were all violated. Now, a bigger or a comprehensive ceasefire, according to the Iranians and their strategic mentality, is that would be stronger, and if violated in one front, would be a violation of it all, and then all would be part of a retaliation against the violator. I think that Hezbollah also made the same calculus. Hezbollah had a ceasefire. Lebanon had a ceasefire with Israel for 15 months. On a daily basis, it was violated. 500 people were killed during this ceasefire, so-called ceasefire time. One person on a daily basis, almost. And so there was no basically ceasefire. It was a unilateral ceasefire on the part of Lebanon. Now, Hezbollah got into this war. I think one part of the strategic calculus was that we need to be part of the ceasefire discussion to stop these aggressions, ongoing aggressions. Of course, the Israelis wouldn't want that. They would do whatever they can to differentiate or separate the two files, Iran and Hezbollah. But I think that they cannot do much about it. Once there will be a push for a ceasefire, the Iranians will not stop until and unless there's a comprehensive ceasefire. So I think we are in a different situation. The Israelis got into this war with maximum goals, and I think they are losing what they have already achieved through their genocide and whatever they did in the past 2 years. Specifically in Lebanon, I think the loss for them will be big, because a violation of a ceasefire moving forward with Lebanon would be a violation of Iran's ceasefire, and ergo, the Iranian missiles will be again hitting Israeli targets if that happens.
Well, if that is how things play out, Hassan, I have to tell you, I don't know how much you pay attention to the Lebanese scene, but there are many in Lebanon who you would think that based on how they're speaking, it's the Iranians who are bombing Lebanon rather than the Israelis who are bombing Lebanon. So if it plays out that way, it'll be interesting to see their reaction when, a settlement ends up. Yeah, go ahead.
And they are afraid. I mean, two sides are very much afraid of this outcome that I spoke about, and they have been voicing it. Israel and some in your country, unfortunately, they don't want to see a ceasefire guaranteed by Iranian missiles, because that would strengthen the resistance in Lebanon. They don't want to see that.
Just it's so incredible to me to see people, and I mean, you see this in the Iranian diaspora as well, to see people just happy to see their country be destroyed because they're just ideologically in bed with the Americans. It's crazy. On that note, I want to thank you so much for joining me once again, Hassan Ahmadian. I hope to speak to you again soon.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Well, Rania, we already sort of left off on Lebanon, so maybe we should just take that as a as a segue into the current situation there on the ground. And you are, of course, in Lebanon.
Yes, I am. I'm in Lebanon. We have now Lebanon's been under Israeli bombs for 2 weeks now, and we're into the third week. And the Israelis have escalated pretty dramatically. Just to, update you on the numbers, the death toll in Lebanon has now reached over 1,000. 1,001 people have been killed, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry, and that includes 118 children in Lebanon. And it also includes, Eugene, 40 health workers. And I'll come back to the health workers because Israel is intentionally targeting them. We now have over 1 million people displaced in Lebanon. That's 1 in 5 Lebanese. This is a very tiny country. It's only 5 million people. I want to just compare that to Iran. Iran is a country of 90 million people. I believe the deaths are somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000, which is a lot of people. But that's a country of 90 million people. Lebanon is this tiny little country of just 5 million and already over 1,000 deaths. So it's, and over 1 million displaced. And I mentioned the healthcare workers. This last week, the Israelis have really escalated dramatically their attack on healthcare workers and facilities. They actually said in statements that they would be targeting ambulances because they're being used by Hezbollah. This is a talking point that we saw them use in Gaza, you might remember, to justify the targeting of not just ambulances and paramedics, but also hospitals, which the Israelis have done in South Lebanon. The Israelis have displaced people. They've created kill zones, much like they did in Gaza, where they issue these, what they call evacuation warnings, but they're displacement orders. They've issued them for the entirety of South Lebanon, including massive cities like Tyre, also known as Suad, where they're telling tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, this area, you cannot live here, and if you stay, you'll be subject to Israeli targeting. And so that's where a lot of the mass displacement has come from, is South Lebanon, also the southern suburbs of Beirut, known as Dahieh, where about 500,000 people live. It's now mostly empty, and the Israelis just are carpet bombing it. And then areas of the Bekaa in the east of Lebanon as well have been subjected to these displacement orders. And by creating these kill zones, this is illegal under international law, but we know that international law doesn't mean anything. But the Israelis will basically say, well, we gave them a warning, now we can bomb everything. Therefore, they're bombing bridges in the south to cut off the south from the north of Lebanon. They've bombed several bridges along the Litani River. They're bombing people's homes. They have issued orders to their military to basically demolish the border villages that are about 3 kilometers into Lebanon. And that's what they're doing. They're demolishing every structure they can in their attempt, as they attempt to invade Lebanon. And also today, they targeted on camera during a live on-air broadcast an RT journalist called Steve Sweeney. It's on video. You can go watch it. It's horrific. Wow. RT issued a condemnation and said this was not an accident. He was wearing a press vest. He was in South Lebanon reporting, I believe, at the Litani, where a bridge had been bombed. The Israelis knew who they were targeting. They know who they're targeting. And then the Israelis issued a statement afterwards saying, well, we gave evacuation orders for this area, so anybody there is putting their life at risk. That is not how the law of war works, but we know the Israelis don't respect the laws for anything. So they are basically, that was a warning to all other journalists, by the way, who are reporting in Lebanon, especially in these kill zones, that we will target you. And I just want to point out, it was not just Steve Sweeney, it was also his cameraman. A lot of people in Lebanon were pretty shocked, also because he's white. he's a white Westerner. So it's like, wow, the Israelis have so much impunity. I mean, everybody knows, right, that that whiteness and having a Western passport puts you up higher on the hierarchy, and it's kind of seen as a measure of protection in these kinds of situations. But I guess not anymore for the Israelis. So that added an extra level of shock, at least even for local Lebanese. That being said, Eugene, the Israelis have also expanded their invasion of South Lebanon. I did an excellent interview on Dispatches with Zachary Foster, who's a great historian on Palestine, who took me through the historical lineage of the Zionist desire to make South Lebanon part of their greater Israel project. And you hear that rhetoric now coming from Israeli officials and Israelis in media and Israelis in the military, that they, in the English press, the Israelis were saying, we're hitting Hezbollah to keep our, to guarantee the security of our residents in the north. We have no option. But in Hebrew media, they have a very different narrative, and that is one of conquest. They want to occupy all of South Lebanon and keep it forever, because that is what the Zionist settler colony needs, as they see it, for security, is to steal more land and have as few Arabs in it as possible to protect their Jewish ethno-state. And so they have depopulated a lot of southern Lebanon, and they are invading to try to hold it. Now, that said, there are fierce battles taking place in the south as we speak, in very strategic locations, places like Khiam, which is always a space of fierce battles whenever the Israelis invade. I mean, this is what, like the 8th invasion, something along those lines. I think I saw it reported in Breakthrough News that this was the 8th invasion of Lebanon by the Israelis. But there are fierce battles between Hezbollah fighters and the Israelis in the south. And, you know, these Hezbollah fighters, they are from the south. Like, this is the land that they come from. They know the terrain well. And I will also say, you know, Hezbollah in 2026 is a bit of a different organization than Hezbollah of 2024. You can see that they've learned lessons of what went wrong in 2024, and they're much more underground. Nobody really knows exactly what's happening with them. Not like in 2024, you might remember they were constantly advertising everything they were doing and posting who was killed, and they kept getting killed because they had communications devices on them that were infiltrated by the Israelis. You don't see that as much right now. So they've really gone back to their guerrilla tactic roots. And they clearly have spent the last 15 months since the so-called ceasefire in November of 2024, which was really just a one-sided ceasefire where the Israelis struck and Hezbollah ceased their fire. They spent that time really rebuilding, reorganizing, re-strategizing, and we're seeing what that looks like right now on the ground in the south as they are pushing. The Israelis aren't able to advance. Like, they advance a little bit and then they get pushed back and have to retreat. And that's similar to what we always see when there's an invasion of South Lebanon. And, nothing's guaranteed. We'll see if that will hold. This week was also an escalation in Beirut, where I live. The Israelis, typically they keep their targets to the Dahia area, which isn't okay, but there are other areas of Beirut that are typically considered safe. The Israelis have begun widening their scope of targets in Beirut, and on earlier this week, there was a really devastating night where the Israelis basically, launched several airstrikes on central Beirut, the heart of Beirut, in the middle of the night, killed over a dozen people as they were sleeping. And then in one building specifically, ordered it to be evacuated and then demolished the entire building with a bomb. I believe I saw some B-roll of that playing. We'll probably see some more of it come up on the screen as I'm talking here. But all that's to say, that was a huge escalation in central Beirut. It was a really terrifying night. Nobody slept. It was 2 nights ago. Nobody slept. And now nobody feels safe. And that's what that's meant to do, right? It's meant to make everybody feel unsafe. I'll go back to the fact that there's over 1 million displaced people that are spread out all across Lebanon. And the Israelis that's who they're hitting. That's who they hit last week too. They hit displaced people who were sheltering in tents on a beach, much like they did in Gaza, by the way. So these displaced people, who are they? They come from Shia areas of South Lebanon and of South suburbs of Beirut and the Bekaa. This is a war on all of Lebanon, but the Israelis are specifically going after the Shia population. You could even call it a kind of Shia Nakba, honestly. And you had Israel Katz, the defense minister, earlier this week, say the Shias. He specifically said the Shias, because there's Christians in the south of Lebanon as well. He said the Shias of South Lebanon will not be allowed to return to their homes until Israeli Jews feel safe. Well, we know Israeli Jews never feel safe until they get rid of the Arabs around them. So that's just a threat to basically steal their land and never let them come back. And that's basically what they do with Palestinians. And so the people who are fighting in the south know that they are fighting an existential threat against their ability to exist on their land, much like the Palestinians. It's an existential battle. And as this is happening domestically in Lebanon, you have the Lebanese government, which is basically being run by people who are in bed with the Americans, who are begging Israel to stop and blaming Iran for everything. I mean, if you heard, I actually scrolled through the Lebanese foreign minister's X page today to look at his X posts. There was nothing about Israel. I couldn't find anything about Israel. Everything was about Iran and how Iran has caused this. Iran has done this. We have to kick the Iranians out of Lebanon. Like, we have to talk and negotiate with the Israelis, is what you're hearing from the Lebanese government. Reading this guy's X post, like if I didn't know any better, I would come out of that thinking that it was Israel, or I'm sorry, that it was Iran who's bombing Lebanon, who's killing medics, who tried to kill a journalist today, who's killing entire families while they're sleeping in their homes and forcing people to become displaced at 3 a.m. in the morning and run for their lives. I would think it was the Iranians doing that. No, it is the Israelis doing that. And it's incredibly embarrassing, Eugene, to see the Lebanese government like bowing down to the Americans and Israelis and saying, please, please, please bring us into your fold. We'll try to start a civil war with Hezbollah.
Oh. Rania might have frozen on us here. I hope that's not me. And I'm the frozen one. Okay, no, they just went to me, so I guess it's not me. But nonetheless, we're going to try to see if we can get Rania back here quickly to finish her points there. Obviously, for those who continually watch, she's there in Lebanon. So obviously, in the context of an ongoing war. There you are. Rania? Well, let's wait. Okay. All right. Well, all right. Now I'm getting the message. I'm getting it in from the booth. They will let us know when she's back. We're going to work on that. But of course, Rania is in Lebanon, ongoing war, ongoing occupation. So as you can imagine, the technical situation there is a challenging technical situation. But I think we might have Rania back now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Got you, loud and clear.
Where was I in my rant?
You were in full flow in your rant. Listen,
I think I was talking about how embarrassing the Lebanese government is.
You were, yes.
All right, well, if you can hear me okay, I'll continue with that.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so Lebanese government, incredibly embarrassing. I think I was saying something along the lines of they are basically begging the Americans and the Israelis to please bring them into the fold. They will gladly try to disarm Hezbollah, disarm their own people in the middle of a war. Like, can you imagine, Eugene, in the middle of an invasion, the Lebanese government trying to come up with some scenario where they can take weapons away from the people who are being invaded, as if you just, put down your arms and welcome the Israelis with open arms, maybe even give them flowers and make them some coffee, they'll just stop bombing you and respect your sovereignty and stop trying to invade your land. It's a complete misreading of history. And I mean, the Israelis have been invading and massacring Lebanese and stealing Lebanese land since their creation. They have been desiring to steal South Lebanon since before the country of Israel was violently created. It's a part of Greater Israel. Their interpretation of what Greater Israel is includes the south of Lebanon up to the Litani River. Even Ben Gurion and all of his acolytes would say that the Litani River is actually the real border of Israel. So this is like a complete misreading of history. It's not as if Israel started attacking Lebanon because Hezbollah existed. Hezbollah didn't exist in 1948 when Israel attacked Lebanon. Hezbollah didn't exist all the times after that Israel attacked and invaded Lebanon. Hezbollah didn't exist until 1982, until after the Israelis invaded and occupied Lebanon. That's where Hezbollah began to exist. And yes, it was supported by the Iranians who helped organize it. They are partners. There is no question about that. But it's just utterly shocking to see the Lebanese government, another Arab government, sitting there witnessing all of these Arab Gulf states, right, who have had the Americans be their security guarantor by putting American bases in their countries that was supposed to protect them. And actually, it's just made them a target. And the Americans don't even care. All of these countries in the Gulf, in the Arab Gulf, are being bombed because they host American bases. And the Americans aren't using their interceptors necessarily to protect those countries. They're actually kind of using them to protect the Israelis as well. And at the end of the day, these Arab Gulf states and their populations are cannon fodder for the U.S. They are human shields for the U.S. and for the Israelis. And the Lebanese government is watching that play out. They're watching Trump throw these countries under the bus. That's what he did by starting this war with Iran, knowing they would be retaliated against. And against their objections, continuing the war with Iran, knowing that they'll be retaliated against. And the Lebanese government's looking at that and just embarrassingly begging to be brought into that fold. It's humiliating to see that they are begging to be another Palestinian Authority. And that is just so incredibly sad. And, I agree with people who don't want a non-state actor to be, making war and peace decisions in a country like any country. I, as a Lebanese person, would love to have a national army that can protect me and my family from this aggressive settler colony to the south of us, who is currently bombing our families, killing our medical workers, killed 118 children in the last 2+ weeks. I want protection against that, and I would love if there was a national defense strategy in Lebanon to take care of that. But the government is offering no national defense strategy. So the only thing right now standing in the way between Israeli occupation and total Israeli dominance over Lebanon, and we know what that looks like. Just look at Palestine. The only thing standing in the way is these guys fighting in the south, who everybody is calling a bunch of terrorists. And also, I would argue the only thing standing in the way also right now is the Iranians, who are supporting the guys in the south who are preventing a full-on invasion and occupation thus far of Lebanon. And that was an invasion, an attempted occupation that was going to happen no matter what. So this is so stunning to me to witness. And, Lebanon is very polarized. I don't expect everybody to have the same opinion or views as I do, but I feel like there are some things that are just basic. And one of the most basic things is that when your country is being invaded, you have every right to defend yourself with weapons from that invasion. And for a government to be trying to take the weapons away from the people of the South, who have nothing literally but their guns and rockets to prevent Israel from stealing their villages, is just mind-boggling.
Well, I think you said it very well. And I'll just make two very quick points. One, I would just like to actually plug the documentary you did, I think maybe over a year ago now, in regards to the pager attacks that took place in Lebanon. And the reason I want to plug that is because I think it's an important humanization, because we hear so much about the south of Lebanon, the south of Beirut, and all these people and Hezbollah supporters and blah, 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 blah that you hear in the mainstream media. And I think that you were able to really bring out with the interviews you did with the victims of that terroristic attack of the pagers, who we're really talking about here. And I think especially people in the United States, you need to get a sense of that, and you need to really understand that, and not just fall into these caricatures that are presented to you by the media in these sort of scare terms and in scare quotes and different things like that. So I just want to say that off the bat, that I think that is really valuable for in its own right, and helping to contextualize and understand what we have going on right now. And then the only second thing I would say is I think the point you're making is 100% correct on so many points. And you look at what's happening now. I think the point you're making about the lack of a national defense strategy, the point about this greater Israel project is, I think what's so unfortunate about this moment is we have reached this inflection point of this sort of neo-colonial reality all across West Asia that was laid out by the U.S., the UK, France, and Israel over all of these years, going back for so long now, so many decades. And it really sadly does remind me of Vietnam, where you had a similar situation where so many people had to die across Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The countries were divided in so many different terrible ways by these outside forces to keep control of this region. And now we're starting to see the unraveling of this totally unsustainable reality that's been imposed on people across West Asia. And it's tragic that so many people are being killed and have to die because rather than have sovereignty and self-determination and let people, live the way they want to live, we've had decades and decades of imposed neo-colonial governments, divisions, the Israeli project of just genocide and ethnic cleansing and destruction. And, where it ends up, who knows? And that's also a really scary factor. But I definitely feel, especially if you live in the US and Europe, you got to understand, this is not just those people over there. This is the deliberate impact of the fact that this was a powder keg that was set up to control people. And now that powder keg is exploding, and a lot of people are being killed, totally unnecessarily because of it. And, I personally view this just Eugene Puryear. If you live in the US, this is being done in your name. And if you don't like it and it doesn't look good, you got to speak
Eugene,
up. You got to speak out.
These bombs that are falling on my city, these bombs that are falling, a lot of them are American bombs. That's my taxes. Mm-hmm. My taxes are being used to bomb my people. It's so, and I know that sounds so basic, but to be experiencing it is wild. To be experiencing the Israelis threatening to turn everything in that I love and care about that's around me into Gaza, knowing what that means, knowing that that means genocide, is horrifying. And to see the world sit back and really just kind of shrug their shoulders, like, how many more Gazas is Israel going to inflict before we say enough is enough? Like, how many more dead babies across the region before we say enough is enough? It's utterly disgusting, uncivilized, barbaric. This is such a beautiful place. Not that if it was an ugly place, it would be okay to bomb, but it's such a beautiful place. And to just see Israel recklessly, intentionally, psychotically drop these massive weapons onto residential neighborhoods and destroy lives every single day, to terrorize me, my family, everyone around me every single day with absolute impunity. We have zero protection, no air defenses, right? We're not allowed to have air defenses here. Like, it's just, do something. Do something. And you know who's not doing anything is the opposition party. Like, I haven't heard them say anything about Lebanon. I think I saw like a tweet by Rashida Tlaib. So, you know, hats off to her. I saw Marjorie Taylor Greene make a really bold and daring statement on CNN. And you know how I feel about her. But I'm like, why are you letting her own this? Like, where are the people that are my ideological allies to talk about how wrong this is? Where are you guys? Like, where the hell are you? Do something, say something, use your power to make this stop. This is really scary shit. Like, this is really stressful. I'm not trying to make this about me, but I'm living it. And I'm not living the worst of it, by the way. And it's still really, really stressful. There are people sleeping in the streets near my house, outside in the cold, in the rain, because Israel made them homeless overnight, who are being terrorized every single day. Like, this is not okay. And over and over and over again, 1 million people being treated that way. The rest of the country being terrorized and threatened to be turned into Gaza. This is not okay. Look what's happening in Iran. This is not okay. Enough is enough. These atrocities are just going to continue to spread. Look at Cuba. Look at Venezuela. Like, when do we say enough is enough? This is the most unpopular war, I think, the Iran war, in the history of like American wars, as far as polling has ever been done. I think it might be the most unpopular. But like, I don't know why that's not translating into anything yet, but I need it to. I really need it to. I really need it to.
Well said, and I think that it's a well taken point, and certainly that's where the resolution lies. Ultimately, is what's happening here in Washington. They're behind it. They're pushing it along with these Israelis. So anything else I said would just be gratuitous, I think, at this point. Well put, well said. I hope people continue to follow Dispatches with Rania Khalek, as I pointed out at the beginning, because you're doing a lot of interviews with people that are just giving a lot of important context here on all these different points that just, if you really want to know what's going on, that's where I would be tuned in. So I think we will leave it there for today. Big shout out to all our guests, of course. Thanks to all of our viewers. Thanks so much to all of our patrons. Shout out to you, Rania, for bringing us all of this crucial coverage week in and week out from what's actually happening in Lebanon, which is hard to find if you're watching the U.S. mainstream media. Before we close, any other points you'd like to leave our viewers with?
Yeah, I just want to say, we are an independent media outlet. And I know I always stress this, but I need to more than ever right now. We are an independent media outlet. We are able to bring you these views, this news, this coverage because of support from our viewers. So please, if you can, please consider becoming a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news. Even a little bit helps a lot. It's how we are able to sustain ourselves and, bring you the news literally from the ground of where this stuff is happening.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
Oh, and make sure you like the show. Also, make sure you like the show. Yeah.
Gotta do that. Eugene. Please, anything that can help us. We appreciate it. No, it's fine. Glad you reminded people. So big shout out to everyone who's liking the show and who's doing anything to support us and spreading the word as well and letting folks who know about us. So on that note, for myself, for Rania, for our whole Breakthrough News team, we will see you next time.